Welcome to the Seven Mountains Podcast, an ongoing series of conversations about the Seven Mountains Mandate, the plan to Christianize America and destroy democracy. The Christian Nationalism Mandate is the subject of my new book, published by Westminster John Knox Press, available for pre-order now. The link to buy and a discount code will be in the show notes. Today's guest, as some people say, needs no introduction, but I will try anyway. And she was a professor. She's a writer, author, all-around good person. Karen Swallow Pryor is joining me. Where are you coming from today, Karen?
Kitchen of my home in Central Virginia.
Central Virginia, as usual, yes. Have you done your daily run today yet?
Well, I am recovering from COVID, so no, I did not run today or yesterday or the day before. But I did do some yard work. It's beautiful outside,
Wow.
so I'm enjoying the weather and the flowers.
Well, that's good to hear. I wanted to talk with you mainly because you've written about what you call the evangelical imagination. And so one of the parts of my book is the mountain of entertainment. We talk about entertainment, but also pop culture and things like that. But the imagination part is really what I think would be helpful to talk about. The subtitle of your book is things that would, I'm trying to exactly the title here, how stories, images, and metaphors created a culture in crisis. I read through parts of it. Tell me, why is the evangelical culture in crisis to begin with?
Well, I think the evangelical crisis culture is in crisis at this moment because I mean I think the symptoms we can see are the polarization, the fracturing, the demonization of different tribes within evangelicalism, the inability to really even know what we stand for, who we are, what our history is. I mean, much of this culminates, I think, in the political moment that we're in now. But as I try to show through the book, evangelicalism is 300 years old, and we have carried through that 300 years the strengths and weaknesses of it and the images and stories and metaphors that form the evangelical social imaginary, which is sort of our collective imagination.
So obviously I read lots of books about defining evangelicalism. We don't want to get into all the different quadrants and things like that, but I don't see it as one whole culture, perhaps even more splintered than it possibly was. Would you say there is, I guess you're saying there is one whole culture, or how would you say that?
Early in the book, I do state explicitly that there really are evangelicalisms,
Okay.
and it's impossible to identify one particular culture, but that's why I just sort of talk about the main streams of that 300-year history, which is I just to very briefly get into the sort of textbook definition, because I think it still holds, is called the Bebington Quadrilateral, and it just basically says that evangelicalism arose in the early 18th century, across, within denominations, across denominations, across the transatlantic, as a renewed emphasis on the importance of the Bible as an authority in the believer's life, the importance of Christ's salvation theologically and doctrinally, the importance of conversion, the individual conversion experience, and the importance of activism, which then took the form of missions and today takes many different forms on the left and the right. And I think those things still do define evangelicalism. Whether it continues to be so remains to be seen, and I think that's part of the crisis as well.
So I want to tie that back to something you wrote recently about expecting too much from the church. You said we should not expect too much from the church, and the church has a very narrow goal or narrow lane that it has. So I've been in several different types of churches. I would say labeling broadly evangelical, and they've all tried to um, create culture, whether it is literally in the church building or through music or through community events. I guess what I'm getting at is um, when you say we should not expect too much from the church, is it when we expect the church to create culture? Is that the part that's too much, or where would you see the church in the creating the culture lane.
Yeah, well, I kind of asked the question, are we expecting too much? And when I say expect, I mean, obviously I have high standards for the church being what the church is supposed to be. But what I've seen, especially in modern American evangelicalism, is people expecting the church to sort of be their be all and end all of life and existence and ministry and work. And so people, we see more and more people going to seminary, which is wonderful. I think seminary is great, but they go to seminary expecting to get sort of a full-time gig at the end of it, or they
Right.
join the church expecting to get a place on the platform to do their thing. And of course those things are all wonderful, but I see so many people being disappointed because they aren't finding their own self-fulfillment or their own vocation or their own sense of personal purpose fulfilled in the congregation of the church. And I think the church has sold that sort of false dream to a lot of people, whether explicitly or implicitly. And the church is not about fulfilling all of our every needs and desires and self-actualization.
Mm.
It has a much more limited purpose.
So, your recent book that's coming out this year is on vocation, and so reading what you wrote before, and I followed the books that you've written on reading well, and then you had the evangelical imagination, and I saw those two as, and again, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you telling the church, right, these are things that are really important, and we're not doing them, and we need to do more of them. And I got the sense, I think Evangelical Imagination was published in 2023, that nobody listened or nobody has listened yet. So I was wondering how did you decide to write about vocation? Why not another culture book? Or do you see the vocation book as a culture book? I guess I don't see the connection between the three, or if there is supposed to be one. I was just surprised that you went to vocation, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, there really isn't a connection. Vocation and calling and career and educational choices and directions are things that I've been talking to my students about for over 2 decades. So there's a lot of experience that I have in talking to the people in the throes of those decisions. I also have a lot of experience talking to middle-aged women like me, many of whom, because they did not pursue, for whatever reason, a professional career or something outside of the home, they often feel like they didn't have a calling, and that's not true. So I basically saw a need to talk about these things, and coincidentally, or not coincidentally, no, that wasn't coincidental. I already knew that I was making a major shift in my own work, and possibly calling, and so I was asking some of those questions for myself.
Yeah. So I teach a freshman writing class, first year writing class here at North Georgia, and I sent it around the students' major because this is really the first time they've ever thought about it since they chose it on a form.
Mhm.
Some students are really into their major. Some students have no idea what it is they chose, and some students have no idea what they want to choose. So I spend the semester on a big question of how to think like a blank, and they fill in the blank with whatever it is they want to fill it in. And to be honest with you, half the students are dual enroll students, so they're still in high school. So it's really hard for them to even think about the question. So we go through different assignments. And I do spend a day on vocation. We read a couple of short pieces. One is religious based, one is not. We watch a video about how this College of Nursing talks about vocation. And then I transition that into, you want to be a part of something bigger than yourself. And then we look at code of ethics for different professional organizations, and we ask, why do they have a code of ethics? And I struggle with that day because, to be honest with you, I don't know how to talk about vocation in non-religious terms.
Mhm.
I do want to mention the religious history to that, and I kind of make a joke about nuns and vocation in
Mhm.
class. Um, but I don't know if that is a word that they get, right away. Did you find that the case at Liberty and the other Christian institutions you taught at, or do they know that word, or?
Yeah, I really don't think that most evangelicals do know that word. I mean, there certainly are a lot of books on the topic already. I read a
Mhm.
number of them in researching for my book, and some schools use some of those books. But I think a lot of it is not very practical or inspiring. It's either one or the other and not both. And I tried to make mine both.
Okay.
And I include in the book, the most helpful points I found about vocation versus career versus job versus hobby actually was from Elizabeth Gilbert, the author, in
Okay.
a little video interview she did. So I quoted her and cite her in a short section of the book because there's overlap in those things.
Mhm.
Often there can be overlap.
Right.
But one of the main points of my book is that being paid to pursue your passion is not likely to happen, and nor is it necessarily a good thing to happen.
Okay.
So there's just lots of different ways of looking at how we pursue our passions, develop our skills, develop our interests, and pursue something that we are fitted in this world that we are in to do. Because that we have to face the reality of ourselves and our gifts and callings, and we also have to face the reality of the world as it is. I mean, some people feel like they're born in the wrong time because the things that they would love to do aren't possible in this world. And that, some of us feel that way. So we have to face the world as it is and find what fits us best.
I think they call those people old souls.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's a very strong emphasis in our university system on workforce development, creating workers for
Mhm.
for the state that we live in. And so the students, the freshmen that I teach, come in thinking the major they choose, A, has to directly translate into a job, and B, they have to choose that very quickly, because if they don't, then they'll miss out on some sort of development of that workforce that's supposed to happen. I guess what I'm getting at is general education courses like first year writing or a literature survey seem to further and further be taking a back seat, unless we find a way to connect it to workforce development or vacation, as you say it. So I guess my question on that is, where do you see the future of general education courses? Where do you think you think we're going to have a literature survey in 10, 15 years?
Well, I have strong views on all of this, and I'll try to state them succinctly. I think that I believe in education for education's sake, but one reason why higher education is going to crumble and have to reinvent itself is because a lot of institutions and a lot of well-meaning folks have guided students into very expensive degree programs that they neither need nor want nor will find useful in their lives. And so we have attached this myth to a college education that says it will bring you success. And then we jack the price up over and over again. And there are some people, I mean, I think that general education courses are excellent for a well-rounded education. I wouldn't want to see them um, disappear. But when we're educating high school students in the same classroom as college students, which is happening more and more, why is no one asking why the college students are getting a high school education? Why are we paying for it twice? Why are taxpayers paying for high school education and then tuition dollars paying for high school or college education so that they can get the same material? But
Oh,
it's
yeah.
yeah, higher ed is overbuilt, and the government has handed out the money, and so the colleges have been able to increase the prices, and so higher education is no longer geared towards people who want to learn for learning's sake, but rather it's a very high-priced way to supposedly get a job that will be sustainable for life, and that's not the best way to get a sustainable job.
So I've asked other people this, especially in evangelicalism. Would you recommend to a student they go to a public university?
I went to a public university.
Yes, you did. And
Yes.
that was some
Yeah.
years ago, so I don't
Yeah.
know if you
Yeah.
answered
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
same.
Those were some tough years. That's when the culture wars
Right.
were. Um, yes, I would recommend the
Okay.
student look for a quality learning experience that will not put them in debt anywhere they can find it where they would fit, and to be discerning and wise and seek guide counsel and mentorship, no matter where they might find that. And they certainly should not assume that going to a religious institution is going to be, again, another magic ticket to a charmed life or insulation from the world's trials and temptations, and most of all, the internal ones.
Right. Um, yeah, so as mentioned before, I was assigning a manifesto this semester, English major manifesto, and we're going to study different types of manifestos, not just literary ones. And I chose that mainly because I want the students to think about why they're majoring in English and why that's important, but also like it has, I want, we're also going to study polemics. So we're doing a little bit of religious link, and I'm trying to every now and then push religion into my class with the vocational thing, with the manifesto thing. And I don't know what else I could do. I was reading another book about similar to your Reading Well book about deep reading. I think it's the title of it, and it's very Christian oriented. And I thought it could work for my class, but it's too Christian, if I want to say that.
Mhm.
And so I was wondering if you had any suggestions on how to make my class a bit more religion infused.
Mhm.
First year writing, English major. I don't do literature. I do rhetoric and composition. So really, I can do anything
Mhm.
but literature. Do
Mhm.
you have any
Mhm.
suggestions for that?
I think assigning Neil Postman's "Amusing Ourselves to Death" would be um, it's a polemical work, so
Right.
it
Yeah.
does that.
Right.
But it also I mean, it's even though Postman was a secularist, it is a book that has deep implications for religion and for thinking about life in a religious way, because it's about the difference between form and content and how the medium is the message. And
Yeah.
it's a fun, relatively easy read. So but I think you can also, I mean, there's so much poetry that throughout history that you can read that is in itself inherently religious and asks big questions. It doesn't have to be even overtly Christian, but just any kind of works that speak to the human spirit and to transcendental values and concerns taps into what it means to be a religious person.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm getting at is with this the question I had for the first year writing class is, how do you think like a blank? So I'm trying to get a big question. And I do think those big questions are what would make the future of higher ed, because we're not the workforce development thing can only get us so far, and we're all going to turn into University of Phoenix, if you will, if we keep doing that, or we see that as our competition. In fact, our university system chancellor is like, our competition is not Ohio State or Florida State, it's Google and Microsoft, because they have these certificate programs and they're training people, and we need to train people in the same way for the same, employers. But if we do something different, even at the public institutions with these big questions. Some of the public institutions are doing those, and I guess I was trying to push, what other big questions and how we could do that. I did assign a reading in my class from Christianity Today about, I think it was, I don't know, the subtitle was something along the lines of how to read like a pastor. And students read it and they picked up on it well, obviously the religious part of it, but they also were interested in the reading and, how to read part. I think that's where I'm headed is, how to read better. Because obviously not a lot of people are reading or reading well.
Right, right.
And so I wanted to ask about on reading well. You mentioned a bunch of different, I don't know, virtues is the word you use there, but one particular one stood out to me was, here it is, the humility one, which comes up a lot, but um, how does humility work with the reading well?
Hmm. That's a great question. So, it requires a great deal of humility to read well, especially when we're talking about reading literature or any kind of difficult texts that are, more than just passingly pleasurable or informative. So we have to be humble enough to remain attentive even when the language is hard or the world is different, the setting is different, or the characters are different. We have to remain humble and develop humility just to learn about to see the world through the eyes of someone who is not us, someone who might not be like us, to be patient enough to be willing to be changed by the experience or to just weigh and judge the experience. That may not be something that, again, it's easy to scroll a social media feed it is harder to read a work of literature that has some length and complexity. And it's humbling to just say, this is a revered work. It has passed the test of time, and I'm going to submit myself to it because I believe I will be better for having gone through the process.
Yeah, I find that difficult to do over the course of the semester. And I have students read something more than once, and really after the second time, they're like, I'm done with this. Especially longer things that take a while. And then they want to also, have what questions do I need to answer both as I'm reading and after to show that I read it so I can, show credit. And yeah, I don't know. I'm getting more frustrated with that. And so I don't know how to pursue that in a public education setting where you get obviously major small areas, but also, it's a general education course where they're being forced to take it as they say, and so they don't really know what to do with it. But anyway, that's just me. So if you were offered a job at a public university, you think you would take it?
I mean, I wouldn't not take it because it's a public university.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know
So
if your work would translate well there. I guess that's my question.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I've kind of transitioned into full-time writing and speaking, so I'm not necessarily looking,
Oh, right.
yeah, to relocate or start all over again at my age, but
You can do it
no.
online.
Oh no, I won't be teaching online. Thank you.
So I am asking everybody that I talk to, when was the first time you heard the phrase Seven Mountains Mandate?
I love that question. And I can remember sort of the feeling and the sense and the awareness that I had when I first read about it. And I'm trying to, relocate myself in my memories. I want to say that it was, um, I can almost see where I was sitting. So I would say it might have been about 10 years ago, roughly.
Okay.
And probably, I think I must have been reading about it in like an email newsletter or something that came to me. Like maybe I don't know that this is the case, but I'm thinking of something like the newsletter that Chuck Colson
Yeah.
used to send out. What was that called? That's not what it was called, but
Yeah.
yeah. So I want I don't know what it was called, worldview report, or I don't even know. But I want to say about 10 years ago, in the context of some sort of regular email or reading that I did, and my impression when I was reading it was, um, first of all, like I never heard of this before.
Okay.
And then I thought, this explains so much.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, people say they grew up with it, but they didn't name it that. And of course, it's been
Hmm.
named other things. And then
Hmm.
people like, yeah, I heard it, in
Hmm.
the last 5 or 10 years. And it's quite interesting to hear the different answers from that. So you're saying that you read about it in a place that was perhaps talking about it, but it wasn't an advocate for it.
Right, right, right. More
Okay.
like explaining it.
Yeah.
And of course, if it going back 10 years, this would have been before everyone was so polarized and before people that we have seen shift, radically rightward say we're not so far right. And
Right.
so some of the sources that I was reading and that I trusted, are ones that I wouldn't now because so much shifting has taken place. But it was, yeah, that if I'm remembering it correctly, it was because then I've read about it more in more hostile
Yeah.
places,
Right. Yeah.
but that wasn't my first encounter. It was from a source I trusted, and it was new to me.
Yeah. So there's been polling on it the last couple of years. It's been more widely embraced. 30-40% of the country, 60% of conservatives, especially evangelicals. And it has gotten a hold somewhere in the Southern Baptist Convention. Um, why do you think it, okay, two questions. Why do you think it explains a whole lot, and why do you think it has taken a hold?
Now, again, I'm not an expert on, on the history and the movements and denominations and how these things happen. But for me personally, when I read about it, I just because I had I taught at Liberty University for 21 years, then went on to a Southern Baptist seminary for a few years after that. And so when I came into sort of the culture war environment of the church in the 80s, I was born and raised a Christian and
Mhm.
believed from a very young age, but I was educated at secular schools
Right.
and we were not fundamentalists in that way or but in my 20s, I guess it was, I became sort of immersed in the culture warring community of the Christian church and became somewhat radicalized, I guess you could say. Um, but it wasn't that radical, and it wasn't, I really understood it to be like, oh, as Christians, we should be good stewards and we should want to be influential in culture. And so the books that I read, and then eventually the school that I went to teach at Liberty, I saw us and I saw our mission as raising up, strong Christians
Mhm.
who would then pursue vocations and callings in all of the world, just as I still believe Christians should, but I didn't see it as an attempt to take dominion over. I saw it as being, salt and light. Um, it was and so when I read that, that's when I began, I think probably the first time I began to question, well, wait, what are we doing here? Aren't we just trying to be good, faithful Christians and be salt and light? Or is there something more to this that I did not understand? And at that time, I mean, I would have clearly associated and clearly understood the Seven Mountain Mandate was very charismatic, very outlying from
Right.
sort of mainstream or even Southern Baptist evangelical communities. So I wasn't that alarmed. I just thought, oh, there's some overlap here.
No, yeah, there is. Definitely, it's expanded beyond that.
Mhm.
And one of the groups that I read about was Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk. And if I could say rather uh, gently, he's a bad reader and takes scripture and takes other things and takes things out of it and then makes it into something that it's not. It would not be a good interpretation. But it has taken hold in Southern Baptist. In fact, Turning Point had, I think, Ronnie Floyd at one of its pastor summit. I went to a pastor's summit from Turning Point here in Gainesville with Jensen Franklin's Free Chapel, which obviously is very charismatic, and there were quite a lot of people from different backgrounds there. And the reason I bring that up is they suggest, of course, that there's a minority of churches that agree with them and that we should take dominion and all those things. And then there's a larger segment of churches that would agree with them in private, but they won't say that in public. And of course, they're trying to get them to be more public about it. Um, do you think that the Southern Baptist Convention is headed that way, or do you think they'll stay just kind of very religious conservative, or how would you say it?
The faction of the Southern Baptist Convention that leans that way and is openly arguing that way has become much stronger and more influential in the past several years. And I think that I mean, as I now understand it, the Southern Baptist Convention seems to have been for a long time fractured and polarized and warring one another. That's actually a lot of their power and influence within their own institutions comes from having these power play, battles
Right. Yeah.
and contests um, with anyway. But
Some people get hit by metaphorical buses with them.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And literal ones now. So which faction and which side will win, I don't know. But I think that because the institution is built on the necessity of having these kinds of battles and conflicts, um, I don't think it really matters for the Southern Baptist Convention. Of course, it matters for our culture, that there are actual Baptist and Baptist adjacent voices arguing for the repeal of the 19th Amendment. It's all about moving the Overton window, right? So people they don't necessarily believe literally what they're saying. They're just being provocative. And if they say it enough and enough people believe it, then they come to believe it. It's all just it's all just a game until it isn't a game.
Right. One of the things that in writing my book, noticing, I tried to draw the history of it from Abraham Kuyper, Francis Schaeffer. I'm not suggesting those were Seven Mountains people, but they had spheres of influence, and people took that into different directions. But one of the things that changed was it became a spiritual warfare thing. So the patience of being salt and light was no longer efficient or useful or not good. We had to do it now, and that now is spread over the last 30 years. But increasingly, more and more, you had to do it now because of some other thing in the future that was going to come, and not allow us to do that anymore. And so I went to this pastor's event, and I wanted to know what would Charlie Kirk say, because what would he say now that he's won, right? Trump's in the White House, they control the Congress, there's other things they control. And like, does he have what he's looking for? And he did not. There's many other things that they wanted to find out. I guess my question to you is, that slowness on reading well and other books you talk about, I don't know how better to persuade people that that's needed, or I don't know how we would convince people that that's needed. Vocation seems like another good thing because it's about spread across a life. I'm not sure how I would convince students, 18, 19-year-olds, to think that sort of slowness. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Well, actually, I hope that my book answers some of those questions. I even, I have a line or short passage in there directed to the young men who might feel frustrated. I use a podcast as an example and say that, that two young men might be doing a podcast where they're, diving deep and discussing important ideas, and they might be frustrated because their podcast isn't going viral like other ones are. And I say, but the fruit of the goodness, truth, and beauty that come from that will last so much longer than the hot takes will. Now, the power of the hot takes and the influence it has as we see playing out is tremendous. It's not to be ignored or minimized. But in our own lives, strong, steady faithfulness, or as Eugene Peterson phrases it, obedience in the right direction, will always bear more fruit for eternity. But patience, another of the virtues that I talk about in On Reading Well, is required. And oftentimes when I'm, to go back to students, over and over when I'm asked to give advice to young people, any form of advice, the thing that I always go back to is be patient. Be patient. Life is long, Lord willing, and the buses don't come, but there's just it can the rewards we reap from the long term, the slower, steadier, more honest kind of work and investment, and sowing of seeds. It will bear fruit that, as I said, will last so longer, when all the other rotten fruit has
Right.
been turned over and tilled into the ground.
Yeah, I see so much. I, I want to take it as sort of a rhetorical thievery that is the Seven Mountains Mandate people are taking the things that you just named so well, and making it their own, so that they're saying that this is going to be a spiritual war that's going to last 10 to 15 years or even longer than that, and we're going to be in it. And yet we know that that's not what they're doing, or not what they say they want to do. So everything that we try to say that is good or takes a while or is important, they're also saying those things about the things that they want to do. And it's kind of hard to break through. I don't want to call it noise, but just, you're not talking about the same things. And it's kind of hard to convince them that they are. And
Also important to point out that there are some true believers in the mix, right? People who are really believe what they're hearing and saying in these matters. But there are a lot of people who are gaining a lot of money or power or position or influence by repeating these things and pushing these things. And so it's really important to be discerning and to be patient and forbearing toward the true believers, and live a life and set an example that is more like the kingdom of heaven. But also we need to realize that the people who are profiting the most on selling these things aren't going to stop selling them. selling these ideas in their books and their conferences because that's what they exist to do. That's
Yeah.
you know.
And the other thing I noticed is they're repeating things the previous generation heard who said
Mhm.
previous things. So if you think the Seven Mountains Mandate is starting in the 70s, we've heard these things repeated
Mhm.
since then, just in different ways by different
Mhm.
people. That is, Charlie
Mhm.
Kirk came up with a professor watch list, which represents David Horowitz's list, which represents
Mm.
before that. And I, it's just so, I don't know the word, frustrating to see people like a new generation caught up with because they didn't know that it had happened before. And so my final question to you is, you mentioned in all your books, it sounds like, I don't know, that we're all historians now. Is that a better way to describe what it is you do? How would you describe your writing?
Have you ever said that? Yeah, that is, I love that. Have you heard, did you just make that
I
up?
just made that up, yes.
That is, yes. I mean, with all due respect to the real historians out
Right,
there,
yes.
I don't want to claim that I am, but we all need to be historians of some
Mm.
kind. That's absolutely true. And that is what I try to do in the evangelical imagination, but that's also what I do when I write
Yeah.
about literature. That's what I do when I'm reading and advocating for good literature. And that's what I'm doing when I'm trying saying we need to try to understand ourselves within the context of time, our own time and in human history. Um, yeah, yes, I agree. I'm
Right.
going to
Well,
quote you on that.
that is the genre we try to do, even though we're English professors.
Right.
Um, well, thank you again for joining us, and for answering my questions about the Seven Mountains Mandate. Um, it is still out there and will remain out there for quite a while, I do suppose. Um, but I hope your new book on vocation gets wide readership.
Your book does as well.